Hello, everyone. I am Maria Plessel. I'm the Executive Director of Minnestar, and this is Mini AMA on Podcasting 101. I want to introduce our incredible guest. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Jackie Biederman, and I'm co-founder of StoryPop Media.
I'm Twila Dang, and I'm the founder and CEO of Matriarch Digital Media.
Fantastic. So this is Mini AMA. Mini AMA, if you've never joined before, every month we host a virtual interactive Q&A with the subject matter experts in our community. This month we're talking about podcasting. I'm really, really excited about that. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping first, just so that we make sure that folks can hear us okay. If you look at the bottom, there is a chat function. Just take a look, click on that, and let us know if you can hear us, and we'll test out the chat. Got a few folks. Good. All right. Thanks, John. Great. Woohoo. Thanks, Caitlin and Stephanie and Amanda and Aaron. Woohoo. All right. Thank you. And thanks for being here today. So we're going to jump into questions, but this chat, thanks, Ryan. This chat feature is yours for the duration of this lunch hour. And so we really want you to take advantage of it, to ask questions. We'll hear a little bit about kind of your story and how you got into podcasting, a little bit about your companies, what it is that you do. And then we'll really dive into questions. We have a few that came through beforehand, but mainly we just start with, how did you get into podcasting? What are your companies? What's your focus? Twila, let me start with you.
Sure. So my company is Matriarch Digital Media. We are a women-centered, women-focused media company here in the Twin Cities. Our mission is to change the way the world talks to and talks about women and girls. And the way that we do that is through our content. We're basically trying to create a new narrative for women to think about themselves and how they approach how they think about themselves. And if we change how we talk to ourselves, it will open up the conversation to everyone else, and everyone can rise to the occasion. I got into podcasting. The company's 4 years old now. About 6 years ago, I worked at a radio station, and that was the first time I'd ever heard of a podcast and what it would be. I was very much a late adopter, but once I got in, I sort of did a deep dive. It was like, you get lost in Google sometimes, and just was super curious about how you produce things and how you make things. And I realized that the radio skill set that I had could be adapted, and I wouldn't have to worry about FCC regulations. So if you said a curse word, it wouldn't cost somebody $75,000, and that would be pretty great. So decided very specifically that it was a convergence of, I wanted to try to explore this. And I was also hitting the point in my life where people were sort of inadvertently telling me I wasn't as relevant. I had hit 40, and it was more like, we can take care of those wrinkles around your eyes, and we can help you lose 10 pounds. And I knew that that wasn't accurate. I knew I was in a good stage of my life, and I felt good about my life. And I thought more women felt like that than felt like they were broken. And I wanted to create a space for them to be able to express that. So we started to build the company, and 4 years later, we're in a really good space.
I love that. That's awesome. Thank you. Jackie, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I've got StoryPop Media. I'm co-founder of that organization, and podcasting for me started about 4 years ago as a passion project. I used to be in tech and IT, so it was kind of a departure from all of that in the business world, and I did some consulting after I had kids, and one thing led to another, and I started listening to podcasts, and I'm like, I love this medium, and I want to be able to use the skills that I have for simplifying communications or making things interesting, telling a story using audio. And so I just started playing around with it. That led to meeting my co-founders at Nobel Peace Prize Forum at Augsburg. I did a little mini series for them. And then we decided to partner and form StoryPop. And so our purpose for our company is to help people do more of what brings them joy. And so in everything that we produce, we try and keep that mission true. So what we do is we partner with businesses and organizations to help them connect with customers and their teams, and use story and use audio to be able to create that connection.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing. We had a couple comments and questions come through. John was wondering you could please post company names and URLs if you can, or in the notes afterwards. We absolutely will be. We'll send a follow-up with kind of some URLs and some information, and if any resources come through from this talk, we'll send that out as well. So good question. Ryan, it's a little, you said you're on your Android, first time using Zoom on mobile. How do I know if my microphone is enabled? So we can't hear you via the webinar format. It's different from a video chat. So if you can hear us, you're all set. I'm going to jump into a couple of the questions that came through beforehand. We talked about how you got into it, but there are a few folks that I was actually having coffee with a few days ago, and we got into this topic of podcasting, and one of the questions was, you know, in the medium of podcasting, is there a different approach that you take when it comes to storytelling versus other mediums, versus, you know, someone is used to blogging or used to, you know, whatever. How do you approach storytelling, and is it any different?
I mean, it is for us. I came from radio, particularly talk radio. Mm-hmm. When you're telling a story in an audio format, you have to be aware that there's a difference. There are differences in even how the audio is conducted. Mm-hmm. If you're doing something narratively, there's a way that you have to play with language to create a mental story or a visual story. When you're doing a chat cast where you're talking person to person, mm-hmm. It's really important to be able to communicate the way that you talk in the real world. When you're trying to talk as you've written, it comes off as very sort of pompous, and mm-hmm. It doesn't ring true to people. Mm-hmm. When you're doing something as a solo podcaster and you're essentially delivering a monologue, you have to know where to create the tension and the drama in your voice, and you have to know how to create the feeling and emotion you're trying to get across. Podcasting as a format is very personal. Mm-hmm. People absorb it differently. When you take away the other stimulus, when you take away like the Foley sounds, say you're like out of a narrative mm-hmm. podcast, and you take away the visual of I can see you and I can see like, I don't like that shirt, or what's going on with your hair. Mm-hmm. It allows the listener to like hone in on what's being said that much faster. And when you deliver it in a way that they can connect to not just what's going into their ears and what they're absorbing through sound, but what's sort of touching them, mm-hmm. It can be really, really powerful. So you do have to be really thoughtful about how you approach that. And sometimes it's subtle differences, and sometimes it's, it can be pretty sweeping in how you do one type versus another, but it's definitely different than some of the other mediums that are out there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I would say, storytelling from an audio perspective is something that humans have been doing forever. Mm-hmm. And so that's really ingrained in how we respond to that. And it is this intimate way. And we do pay attention to stories and audio. As far as how to write for audio, there are some really good resources out mm-hmm. there, and I can share the link with them. But one of my favorite tips that I read was, if you're writing something out, if you're going to deliver a monologue, obviously you're going to try not to read it, mm-hmm. but pretend that you're getting paid by the period. When we speak in really short sentences. And so just keep that in mind as you are preparing something, your notes for audio. How we speak is very different than how we write, like Twila was saying. We don't use clauses when we speak, different tips like that. So make sure there's a lot of periods in whatever you write, and that will hopefully help.
I love that. I love that because it kind of goes back to when you hear in school about, how much of communication is tone, or how much of communication is visual versus just like written. And thinking about, Twila, what you were saying of just the inflection and how you're building drama. It's not only, it's the writing component, but it is also, using your voice as almost like a vocal instrument and building the tension that way. I love that. Related to that, we did have a question around, where is it here? You were starting to talk about recommendations, and so if you had someone who's just starting out or toying with the idea of getting into podcasting, are there resources, are there recommendations that, books or whatever that you would recommend for folks?
Yeah, so I think that it depends on what they're looking to do. If they're looking to do a DIY podcast, then there are plenty of, I mean, if you Google how to start a podcast, there are resources. Pat Flynn is a podcaster that has a whole course on how to start DIY podcasting. And he's
an OG. He's been in the industry forever.
Yes. Then there's other people that do the same thing. If you're looking to produce a podcast with a team, then that would be a different approach. And there are resources for if you're kind of already into podcasting, you want to hone your story and that type of thing. This American Life's webpage, which is like another original podcast, has a lot of details on storytelling if that's important to your podcast.
Cool. Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug.
Yeah.
If you're here in the Twin Cities and you're a woman and you want to work in the industry, we do an event once a month called Women in Podcasting. It's the second Sunday of every month at Osborne 370 at the Glenn Nelson Center. It's completely free. It's 2 hours, and it's a chance to network and meet other women and help get support and services to help get your podcast up and running or to help improve a podcast. And we'll continue to do that for free as long as we can because we want more women in the industry. We don't want these numbers to be lopsided. As far as teaching tools that you can get access to, I'm a big fan of Pat Flynn and what he does and how he makes it really accessible for an everyday user to get involved. There's a couple of new ones that have popped up on the scene that are really helpful. Google, I believe it was Google, has a sort of a podcast 101 type thing you can walk yourself through if you look it up on Google. It's like a series of videos. Anchor just launched a series of videos at the end of last year because Anchor is a free service and you can basically record and launch a podcast within their platform. They want podcasting to be 100% free, and now they have the full backing of Spotify because Spotify purchased them last year. So they have a whole series of videos that are like, it's two well-known podcasters walking you through the basics to get something up and running and going. The big surprising one that just popped up on the market that is brand new, most of us haven't even fully vetted it yet, is Spotify also purchased Gimlet, which is basically the #1 audio storyteller in the podcasting market. And Gimlet just produced basically a mini series podcast of like a masterclass of how they do what they do. And it's completely free to the public. It's them giving all of their best practices and tips on narrative, how they use sound, how they use editing, all of their practices in a format that says, we want you to get better at this, here's how you can get better at it. It'd be a great resource for people. I know we've already bookmarked it and told our teams to start, going into it and listening to it because they're the best in the market, and why wouldn't you want to learn from the people that do it best?
That is awesome. And related, Dick was wondering, what are the best podcast hosting services that you would recommend and why? Anything that you would add to?
I mean, to be honest, I don't think you really can go wrong with the podcasting services that are out there, at least what I've experienced. I use Blueberry, and it works well with WordPress if you have a WordPress site, but you don't need to. I've also used Buzzsprout. And they all just have different payment plans. Some of them have free trials if that's important to you. They have, if you're going to host multiple podcasts and that type of thing. But I mean, it's just having a dedicated server for your podcast. So really, I don't think you can go wrong.
I would agree with that. I think Blueberry, Podbean, Buzzsprout are all really good ones. Especially for folks that are getting in at the ground floor or making multiple things and need a little bit more help with the management piece of it. They have really good tutorial tools. They have pretty good capture on sort of helping you paint a picture of what the numbers of your podcast do. And, when you need data, they're pretty good about, being able to provide data. I think if money is is a barrier and you're worried about like being able to pay for services, because a lot of podcasters come in as hobbyists and don't have money, can't afford it. Anchor is absolutely a #1 that people can get access to. Now on any of these services, I always say, please read all the fine print, because usually somewhere in the deep cut of all of these, they have some option that says that you're giving an open license to have your stuff edited, used for advertising, used into perpetuity in other places, and you have to be comfortable with what you might be giving up for exchange of ease of use. if you're working at a company or a large corporation and you're looking to like expand, there are companies now like Art19. There's a couple other ones that are out there, like Simplecast, where they take hosting and it moves to the next level, where they are hosting your shows. They're basically producing reports to give you data and feedback. They can assign account reps to help you sort of take that data and look at where opportunities are that you might be missing. They may even be able to broker relationships with advertisers and sponsors, but that's usually a little bit further down the line. I would say that is not something to jump in on if this is new to you. Start with a tool that you can get really comfortable in so you can understand what the dynamics of podcast hosting is and how it works and how to make it work for you without a headache before you start to, like, you should deal in Simplecast and things when you're really monetizing. Like when you're trying to get in and get comfortable with all the mechanisms. Use an Anchor, use a Buzzsprout, use a Blueberry, where they even have good, customer support, by email format. I can speak directly to Buzzsprout, and they're so dedicated to customer support that even though they don't have a phone number, if I call them with a technical problem, somebody usually texts me their cell phone number and it's like, here, just give me a call, I'll walk you through it. And in a land now where nobody provides customer service numbers or people you can talk to directly, that says a lot to me that they care enough about the relationships to help walk you through things.
Absolutely. Ryan had said that just note that Anchor/Spotify will control your RSS feed and have reportedly exerted some control on content a few times. Best advice is to control your RSS, then use a free content distribution if desired.
And that is, like I said, again, that is all of the things that Spotify has been doing in the last year is a part of this sort of new, where we're now going with this new path of, large corporations buying content and controlling where the content goes. Nobody really knows what Spotify's end game is with this yet. They have now declared that they want to be number one in audio, not just music, not just audiobooks, not just podcasts, but in audio. We don't actually know what that means yet. And even in some of the platform hosts, you have to be careful in how they exercise, how they distribute your material. Like even a Buzzsprout, which we used for a long time, that used to be able to point directly back to your website when you wanted to. And then like maybe 2 years ago, they started making it point back to things that point back to them first, which impacts your bottom line if you're trying to get people to click through to your website or click through to your social so you can get those numbers. But those numbers are getting diverted and are going to Buzzsprout. And they're not counting those, because the story is growing to be for podcasts, not just downloads and listens, but impressions across your brand. All of those numbers count. Yeah. So you do have to, I think what Ryan is saying is a really valuable piece of advice, and you need to be paying attention always to service changes and service agreement changes, because these things turn on a dime, and the only thing you really truly have control over is your IP at the end of the day.
Anything that you would add to that, Jackie?
I think Twila summed it up well.
I'm always worried about IP.
A couple questions came through. Stephanie is wondering, do you edit your podcasts in-house? There appear to be lots of editing solutions available online. Do you have any experience with them?
We've only edited in-house, and so that's a service that we provide to our clients. I have friends that have used podcasts. We edit podcasts, which is specifically for podcast editing only. They won't help with like the story and that type of thing. I'm not sure if you also need to specify timestamps. They're more affordable, like usually monthly packages are offered by some companies like that. But I don't have personal experience with using that.
We do a lot of our editing in-house. We have contractors that work with us, 2 very talented women that do the majority of that work. We've also used other tools, and we try to help recommend that if you're getting in on it, I always recommend trying to learn the skill set. I'm the worst editor on our team, but I do know how to do some really basic stuff. But I try to make sure that I don't handle things that are really important. I make sure that goes to where the real talented people take care of that. But in the past, we've used services like Descript, where you can not only create a transcript, but in the last year, they've added a full editing suite so that you can do pretty basic editing, on it. Audacity is always a free open source tool that can do a lot. If you're familiar with it. If you're not, it's actually a really good tool just to play with and learn, because it very much mimics what you see in like Pro Tools, which is industry standard for editing. if you're not comfortable editing, please don't put yourself through the headache.
Mm.
Go find a talented editor. If you're here in the city and you're not familiar with an editor or how to get access to an editor, there's groups like Twin Cities Radio Club that have, editors that, and radio production folks from all the big radio stations and television stations here in the city. You come talk to us at Women in Podcasting. We either know editors or we have editors in-house that are always available to do projects. Editing is one of the most important pieces of your podcast, because a good editor understands editing and sometimes like sound mixing, and for you, which will help make sure it's at a level and is cut the way you want it to be cut. But the worst thing you can do is produce bad audio while do all this work and then have the audio come out bad on the other end. So it's worth money, and it's worth like taking the time to find somebody that can do it while teaching yourself a skill set.
Nice. Another question came through. Do you have to have a website to host or store your episodes?
No, you don't. What you need is a hosting platform, which is the Blueberry, Buzzsprout, Podbean. But if you don't have a website, it's hard for people to get to know you. And that's a central spot where you can direct people on your podcast. That's where you can store your episodes, store your show notes. You're allowed to enter a description in every episode that exists on whatever tool you're using to listen to the episode, like Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. But that's all that's there. So if you want people to engage with you further, I'd highly recommend a website in addition to your host that's hosting the podcast.
I promise I won't have a whole rant about this, except to say you have to have a website. Personally, I feel like a lot of us, when we started, we built out our podcast. We had a platform host that would distribute it to the different services and apps, which was great. And then we were using social media to like drum up marketing support, because social media is a free tool. Social media is great, we all use it, but it's rented space. And anytime the algorithm changes, or anytime the popularity of the app dips, or anytime a new one comes and starts eating away at another one, you have to go build that voice all over again. You have to go build a whole new way to do that all over again. A website is a home. You own it, you pay the mortgage. So when you send people there, it's your house. You can communicate exactly the way you want to communicate. You don't have to communicate in 140 characters or less, like Twitter, or through images like on Instagram. You can communicate however you want and build that story with your audience and gather your community in one central location. All podcast hosting services, the Blueberries, the Podbeans, the Buzzsprouts, have audio players and embed codes that you can put on your website, so that all of your audio can go directly to your website and can be heard directly from your website. And you can direct people there constantly to go find new material and previous material and outtakes or whatever you want to share. It can all live there. That's your house. You have to have a house, especially if you're trying to build something that over time can maybe become a revenue source or help establish you as an expert in field. You have to have some place where people can go and engage further than the content you're giving them in that particular moment.
I love that. We should go on more rants. Actually, one of the questions was hot takes.
Ooh.
What are your podcasting hot takes? Purposefully open. While you're thinking of that, I'm going to remind people, because we had more people join, to take a look at the bottom. There is a chat feature. There's also a Q&A feature. Either one of those, if you put in your questions for our amazing guests, we'll get them up and running here. So, hot takes.
Okay, I've got a hot take.
I'm here for it. It's not just me.
I don't know if it's a rant, though. It's not a rant.
Either one is welcome.
Okay. So as podcasting has been around for a while now and more popular, the quality of the content is increasing. So when you are putting a podcast out there, maybe 5 years ago, you can technically create a podcast on your iPhone and record, but the quality compared to other podcasts is just not going to be there. And it depends on, are you doing it for a hobby? Are you doing it to represent your business? There's a different level. So with that being said, another trend or a hot take is that a lot of companies and a lot of production companies are doing shorter segments. So keeping that high quality, which doesn't always mean that the production cost goes down depending on what you put into those segments. But if there's a way to like have an interview and you can segment it somehow and have that high quality, and you can have the quantity that's there to go along with it, but maintaining that quality. Neil Patel, he's releasing, I think it's like 5-minute episodes now. Oh. And so people are doing that. They're just like your mini content bites, and that is a hot take to pass along.
I think my real hot take is usually a piece of advice I give. We get a lot of people to sit down with us that want to do client work. And I hear this way too often. I want to do a podcast where I interview people. So here's what I'm going to say about that. 1, you don't need to show us that you know a bunch of interesting people by interviewing them. If you know interesting people and you really like them and you want to talk to them, take them for coffee. Doing an interview with people that it's novel to you, that you have access to a certain group of people, it's not novel to podcasting, because what it winds up becoming, especially in the business format, is the same like 30 people rotating on their own podcast. I know some really important people. I have access to people like Gary Vee. That's great. Gary Vee has a podcast and all the other people he gets access to. And the way I explain it most easily to people is if you have something you're passionate about and you want to talk about it, you need to be centered in that conversation. If you set an interview podcast up and you're brand new to this, and then it's like setting up a beautiful dinner party and you invite all your friends and you say, I'm going to have this beautiful dinner party with wonderful food and wonderful conversation and there'll be drinks. Show up at this address. You show up at the address and everyone's at the door, and you open the door and you usher them into someone else's house. We don't know you. We don't trust you. We haven't learned anything from you. We have learned that you have given someone else more important a platform that they already may have somewhere else. And now I'm going to follow them, not you. You need to establish the point of view that you have. You need to establish who you are and what you want to share with us. Yes, you can incorporate interviews into that or conversations into that, but building a brand new podcast based solely on an interview format without a really strong point of view that you're centered in is always going to be a mistake, because anybody can be the disembodied voice that asks the questions. If you're making a podcast, you want us to trust your point of view. You want to build a relationship with us. We have to know who you are to do that.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. So we had a couple questions come through. Ryan also said the Audacity to podcast first 40 episodes are very focused on using Audacity free app to edit yourself as simply as possible. Thanks so much for sharing logistical specifics to the lady on the left. We had another question come through. My company is considering starting a podcast. What metrics should we measure for success? What is a fair price for hiring an editing/distribution company for weekly 1-hour episodes?
Ooh, now you're asking for secret sauce. I mean, the metrics depend on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to use a podcast as a marketing tool? Are you trying to use it as a communication community building tool? Are you trying to use it to help launch a specific product or service? That is going to change who you want this metric to come from. If the metric on a podcast, because sometimes a podcast is meant to build enough community to gain like email addresses. So if the metric is we were able to capture 10,000 email addresses in this amount of time, then you know what your metric is. If the metric is we want to make something really cool and interesting and gain a big audience, that's different, right? Approaching it as a business is different, is very different from approaching it from an entertainment perspective. Sometimes businesses that get into the podcasting space are better served to sponsor something that is doing something interesting, and their name is stamped on it every day saying, brought to you by this company, right? So then we have this new respect or intrigue with this company because they were cool enough to support this thing. But you have to really be thinking about who the core audience is and what the end game is for the thing you're making before you make it, so that you don't accidentally make something that doesn't fit or serve, because sometimes the imagined metric that you have in your head when you're iterating is not the same as the tangible thing that you have to be able to prove to a supervisor, this is what we put all this money behind, right? This is what it was for. Now, cost is different. It depends on the size of your company, it depends on what you need, it depends on who you have in-house. you're going to get wild swings of, what people ask for in that. If that's the case and you're curious about that, I would say that's a conversation you should have with myself or my co-host, because we do that kind of work. And sometimes it's not standard across the industry. Podcasting is still very much, in a lot of respects, the Wild West. People are setting rates that are depending on the area you live or the part of the country that you live in, depending on the industry and his experience with podcasting. Everybody's got enough Googling to be dangerous, so they start thinking it shouldn't cost that much, but it really does cost to make a quality product. So when I sit down and I pitch people and they ask me how much it takes to make a certain type of production, and I give them a number that is standard to what I do in the industry and the experience I've had, and I've gotten every response from, oh, as though I didn't charge enough, to that feels excessive because they had no experience doing it and they thought it was going to be free to do, or it was going to be very, very low cost to do. It depends on what you want, and it depends on what you want, and depends on what you're prepared to do, or even the length of time and the duration of time that you're going to do it. If you're doing an ongoing podcast, that's a different cost than a mini series. That's a different cost than branded audio. Sometimes that's a different cost in like consultation for someone like us to come in and consult with you to get you up and running, and then you can take over the production and do it yourself. Sometimes you don't want to do anything but show up and talk into a mic. Those are different things. So you have to, those things are still pretty much case by case in an industry like ours.
I'd agree with that. And just to say, to add to the audience and being really knowledgeable about who your audience is and what your purpose of your podcast, because not everybody needs a podcast. And you don't have to have one. Like Twila said, you could be a sponsor if you want to get into that realm, or you could advertise on podcasts that you really feel like align with your purpose. But one thing that we do initially when we talk with our clients is go through the purpose and the audience and really hit that home. Like, who are you targeting? Why do you want to reach them? What do you want to say? But I would just caution, I know that the idea of, podcast to convert sounds alluring, but it's really a top of funnel. It's to deepen your relationship. So podcasts are not a metric that probably would not be successful is listens convert to somebody buying my product.
Exactly.
They might over time. And it's all like, again, what Twila was saying earlier, putting yourself in there, putting your brand, putting you in there. It's building a relationship. And at the beginning, we talked about how intimate audio is and how you feel like you know somebody. And so you're getting to build that. So that's a metric that's kind of hard to identify when people are looking for that hard ROI. That is something that isn't always there. And so you have to look for other metrics that are important to you.
That is really brilliant. It brings us to another kind of hot take question.
Okay.
Who should be making a podcast and who shouldn't? We talk about companies that are getting into podcasting and whatnot. So who does it make sense for and who doesn't it?
I think that if you have a solid purpose and you can see that a podcast could help you deliver that purpose or to reach or to communicate with the group that you're trying to reach, that's one. A second is that whether you or somebody that you've hired or included to host is involved in being excited and kind of shaping what that looks like. So I see it kind of as a Venn diagram of overlapping the perfect podcast with what your audience needs to hear and what you're excited about. And somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot. And that would make a good podcast. But in addition to that, you need time and money. And so if you have a lack of time, then you need to have a team that can help support you. Otherwise, if you do it yourself, it is pretty time consuming, but definitely a possibility.
I always say that I actually really and truly believe that if you want to be podcasting, that there's a space for you to be doing it. And being intentional is really, really important. And knowing like why you're going to spend some time doing this, what the end game is in trying to create something. Because podcasting is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time and energy and effort and diligence and consistency to make something. Even if you're just making something that's like a mini series, it'll be 5 episodes. It still takes a certain amount of time to do that at a level at which you'd be proud to share with other people. The only people I ask not to do this, to be perfectly honest, are the people who think, I'm going to be, i.e. rich or famous by doing this.
So I'm not going to make $1 million starting my own podcast? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, you'd be amazed at how many people get in and they get the same thought bubble around them that they see in the YouTube spaces of the world or the Instagram influencer spaces of the world, where they go, well, I'm creating value and I have something important to say and I'm going to make this thing and everybody's going to fall all over it. A lot of the work that we do, because it's creative based, we are always recruiting for talent at different points and looking for talented people. And I always have to be really mindful when I see a turn in a person who's having a conversation with me. Usually a real good hot take to not get hired by me is by being told up front, like as soon as you meet me, you say, I should be on your network. We need to figure out how that happens. And you'd be amazed at how many times I hear that. As soon as it's centered in I, not the thing I want to share or the thing that I have a passion for talking about something, or there's this thing I've always wanted to discuss where it's rooted in something else and not just, I'm great, you should work with me. You're already walking with the wrong intention.
Yeah.
And it's going to be pretty frustrating when you get in on podcasting and you launch a brand new podcast and you're like in the Midwest and you go from zero recognition in that first week when you get like 200 downloads, which should be a victory lap. And you're like, it's just 200. I got more on my Instagram post. We can go hang out on Instagram because it's faster. It's going to be a quicker return. It's going to be a quicker, if you're looking for that kind of return, podcasting is not the space for you. It's just not. The only people getting this kind of return on podcasts are really, really famous people.
Yeah. What are some other, like, the biggest misconceptions that, I mean, you do a lot of client work and I'm sure you field a ton of questions. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about podcasting?
I think time is a big one.
Yeah.
How long does it take
so
on average?
You sent the questions in advance. And so I was like, how can I answer this? Again, it depends on what kind of podcast you're looking for. Sure. But if you were to produce maybe an interview style podcast that had very light editing and maybe some music up front, prepping for the interview, conducting the interview, scheduling it, doing post-production, so cleaning it up, probably 10 hours at least. And it really depends, again, on like, how much are you going to edit? You know, there are a variety of techniques. Nobody speaks in a linear fashion. If you wanted to move something in front of the other, again, I mean, all of these are variables, but that's for one episode, not including the whole planning and the marketing.
Yeah, the planning, the marketing, the release. I mean, we batch record, so we actually do all of our episodes in advance before we release anything to the public. We don't do week-to-week recording, mostly because we have a company that's built on a lot of individuals who still work full-time jobs, we're building an engine together, and that requires us to have access to people when we can have access. So I would say for an average like chat cast in our world, which would be like 2 people talking about a specific topic, you know, week to week, and we make maybe 10 episodes of that over the course of a season, with the pre-production, full production, and post-production, and then marketing to get it out. We're looking at a minimum of 2 to 4 months on production, usually a 4 to 6 month turnaround on production, and that gives us the opportunity to take care of any and all landmines that pop up, like illnesses or canceled things or recording problems, you know, scheduling problems, because when you're scheduling more than one person in a space, on average on a team like ours, has to be you know, someone who's actually doing the recording, the hosts that are participating. If they have a guest, that's another variable. It's coordinating all these schedules, getting them in enough space to actually record something, you know, and then all of the stuff that happens after, which is everything from, okay, take the audio, Mr. and Ms. Editor, and here are the notes, and wait, we forgot about this part, or, oh, we just listened to it and the sound was a little off, can we fix it? And then we finish and have to go, okay, when are we gonna release this thing? And how are we gonna market it? And where's the audience? And how are we gonna set up the communications? And who's gonna run the social and run point on this? And who's gonna get all this loaded to the platform host? And who's gonna go seek all the permissions from all of the services? It's all, you know, it's all of those things.
Yeah.
You never realize how many small moving parts there are to a podcast until you actually start making one. Now, mind you, none of this deters me. I love this job.
Yeah.
It's the most fun work. Even in the minute details, it's the most fun work for me. But there are minute details.
Yeah.
And you do have to sort of know how to build enough time out so that you're doing it. I mean, I honestly don't know how people do this week to week and come in and go, okay, we're going to record on Monday and we're going to release on Thursday. I mean, I know some folks that work at the New York Times that work on the Daily, and they walked us through their schedule, and I wanted to crawl in the corner and cry because of the turnaround. The turnaround is just about 22 hours every day. From the time that thing goes out, within 2 hours, they're completely back on it. And it has to make a pass through New York and a pass through London for some of the edits, and then it has to come back. And it's just, so in terms of what people don't understand, it takes time to make things, not just good things, but things. So it takes more time to make a good thing. And you have to really think about that.
So it's not just the hour interview.
No.
It's not free.
No.
It's not going to make you $1 million.
No.
But it's amazing.
It is. And that's it. I mean, and anybody can, anybody can get into podcasting, which is exciting. And I think if you can come up with that purpose that really motivates you, that you want to share with people, that's going to keep you going when things are a little bit more challenging, when time is limited and you've got to get something out that will drive you. So I think spending time up front to know why you're doing it is so essential, so that you'll stick with it.
We had a comment from John, who, when we started talking about this, of like how much time he had guessed, 6 to 8 times the length of the podcast, and then he wrote back, "Wow, I guessed low." Reminder that we have the chat and Q&A functions at the bottom. We have about 19 minutes left, so feel free to really get those questions in. We have a question from Tucker. Tucker says, so I work for a nonprofit LGBTQ library, and we are looking at bringing more members, volunteers, and donors to the library. Specifically, we're trying to reach a young and diverse group of people. We're looking at potentially starting a podcast to help do this. Do you have any tips or tricks from a nonprofit perspective?
From the nonprofit perspective, use any and all free tools that you can. Make it as, cut those costs down as much as you possibly can. Start with your own community and find out who within the community that's working with you or for you has skill sets that can be applied. You may already have somebody that's ace with social media. You may have somebody who really understands how to talk through like social media on video or IG stories, that knows how to really make compelling content. Really define who the audience is, because the audiences you were talking about are wide and disparate, and you communicate with them in lots of different ways. Figure out who the core audience would be for this particular thing if you're making a podcast, and speak to that audience. And the only other piece of advice I would really give is, when you make audio, it's never just to be used once. So if you're making audio, you need to find a way to repurpose it again and again. So if you make, say, a 5-episode podcast to introduce people to your organization and some of the voices of your organization, those need to be turned into transcripts that can be made into available transcripts of the podcast, that can be reworked as blog posts, that can have quotables taken out. You can take small snippets of that audio and share it on IG Live and in your Insta stories and on your Facebook or in a YouTube. You can take that audio and put it, embed it into a like a PowerPoint presentation and run it in YouTube so it can go further. When you don't have a lot of resources, take the resources that you have and really stretch them and really push them and really get creative in how you exercise them. You can even take that audio and pin it in places like Pinterest. You can pin audio and video on Pinterest now. So you have to use every free resource that's available to you and be as creative as possible, so that when you make this one thing you're proud of, you can find all these different ways to use it again and again and again. The work that an organization like yours does is evergreen, which means the message isn't going to change, and the message and the delivery shouldn't change, because it's speaking to hearts and minds in a very specific way. Utilize that, create around that, repurpose it as much as you possibly can.
So what I would probably add to that is just, you had mentioned maybe even a 5-episode series. You can start small, and you can start with those 5 episodes. You don't have to commit to, we're going to start a weekly podcast. Some of the free tools we touched on, but just to kind of summarize, there's Audacity, so download that. That would be a really great resource to use. Use Pat Flynn's or whomever's training, and Anchor or SoundCloud. SoundCloud allows you up to 2 hours of free hosting. And so that is another platform, again, if you're doing like maybe 5-10-minute episodes or something like that, you can store that on SoundCloud and try it out, get feedback, see if it's something that you continue to want to invest time and some funds into.
Great. So another question that we had was actually around, and this is a little bit specific, but like intro and outro music. Someone was wondering about how do you deal with, or is it an issue around copyright infringement? Like how do you deal with all of that?
Do it right the first time. So you already know if you don't have license to some music, and so if you're pulling something that you heard off the radio or something from your favorite band and you don't have permissions, then you're doing it wrong. It's not legal. There are plenty of services, whether it's Audio Jungle or Marmoset. There are all kinds of services that offer music that, while it might not be the most exciting music or it might not be the sexiest music, it is music that you can purchase and then have access to either the license or own the track outright. You can make your own music if you have friends that are musicians, because intro and outro music isn't that long. You don't actually need a lot of it. And so, it's never, ever, ever worth it to take something that is copywritten or owned outright by someone else or some other company and use it and think, well, they won't pay attention to me. I'm a small thing. It's a little thing. The reckoning day is coming for podcasting the same way it did for YouTube. The music industry is not making money the way that it used to make money. Eventually, they're going to come back and find every single place where their music is being used that they aren't being paid for, and they're going to come back and get their money. YouTube just spent 5 years in negotiations to make a balloon payment to, and had to go hold all of their people accountable using the platform to say, you can't do this anymore. This is how this works. You have to be cognizant of that. I don't care if you use a mic and you just whistle into it. Don't take things that don't belong to you. IP is so important. The thing that you made that you're super proud of, you'd be so angry if you turned around and saw that someone else was using it without your permission and didn't ask you and didn't pay you for it. The same extends to the music. And because it's such a little part of it, it's not worth, it's just not worth it. It's not worth taking that risk.
And for nonprofits and for the music licensing that you may have a budget for, there are Creative Commons licenses. So if you Google Creative Commons, there are different attributes. There's public domain if you really wanted to score your piece with like the 1812 overture.
Yeah, exactly.
Some classical music.
Water lilies is free, people. Water lilies is free.
But there's also people that have listed, there's a website called Better with Music, and there's a guy who says, just credit me at the end.
Is that the guy that has like the 400?
So
okay, he's actually really great. And
yes,
if you go on YouTube, like 2/3 of all the YouTube videos from like 2005 to 2009 were this guy's music, because he made all different kind of jaunty things. He made like 400 pieces, and he would do 400. There was 400 with lyrics, 400 with just instrumental. And he just liked to make music, and all he wanted was credit. And then he would have this one little thing in the corner where you could pay like $30 to like say thanks if you wanted to, like you could. Yeah. And I'm sure he's made a ton of money, because everybody I know has used that music at some point in a video. So there's even familiarity to the music if you're using it. But there's even like there's like a website that's like free music or something.
Yeah.
Mind you, it has like 2 million things on it. And half of those are weird German industrial disco tracks. But if you want to do a deep dive on a weekend and find something weird, you can, like if you want to get weird with it, you can get weird with it. We've even had relationships where some of our hosts had friends that were musicians, and we came up with an agreement. They allowed us to use their music, but we made a written agreement that said, thanks for, we'll use it for 2 years. Mm-hmm. At the 2-year mark, we revisit. And depending on the level we've achieved with the podcast, we will make sure that a payment structure is instituted at that point, or if money is made, that we will make sure a percentage of it goes back in to help that musician, because them contributing a song helped our success.
Yeah. To your previous comment about just the music industry, John had said that they're already starting to use AI tools to scan for these things.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Listen, and I'm like, okay, from the music perspective, you have to think about that. From the title and name perspective of your podcast, start thinking about it. Hollywood is now doing this general trademark sweep because podcasting wasn't a trademark. It wasn't a part of the trademark and patent office before. It only got added in the last 2 years. Before, you could get an audio trademark, but not a podcast trademark. So a friend of mine had a podcast that she had been running for 3 years really well. New Line Cinema did a trademark sweep, and her title got caught up in it because there was a movie they had made in the 90s that had the same title, and they wanted it protected everywhere, and they've got millions of dollars in attorneys to do it. So she got basically a cease and desist that said, no, you can't use this title anymore. She couldn't fight it. She was in the middle of a trademark process with the title, but they wouldn't let her have it anymore because previous trademark holder was basically exerting its rights to own it across the board, and she had to change everything. So all of these large corporations that are now paying attention to podcasting, it's a good thing, but it's also going to create headaches for those of us who thought we're in the margins and nobody's paying attention to us. When it comes to money, they will always find a way to pay attention. So just always be careful of that.
We got about 10 minutes left, so any last minute questions, definitely throw them in the chat or the Q&A function. There are a couple more that kind of came through on here. What is the number one thing that you wish you knew when you started podcasting?
For me, it is that it doesn't have to be perfect. And I know we are talking about having high quality and all of these things and going through how important that is, and it is important. But I think when you're creating a podcast, just keep in mind that you're proud of it. You're probably, it's something that you might hear other podcasts that you like, which I recommend doing, just going out and listening to a bunch of things and maybe picking from this or that as you create your podcast. But you might feel like, oh, mine falls a little bit short, and we are our own worst critics. So get something out there. A podcast is living. Pick your favorite podcast and listen to episode number 1. And it is so different if they've been around for a few years than the current episode. And so that's true. Don't be scared of that. Kind of embrace that it's going to evolve. You'll learn. You'll hear feedback from your audience, and you continue to create. And I think that's the fun of it.
I think the thing I wish I'd known up front. I think the thing I wish I'd known up front was how much time it was really going to take, because we had a lot of stumbles around just trying to figure out how to pull things together and how to get access to people's time. And then what happened when we didn't have access to people's time. I felt like on some level I was at least smart enough to say, because I was asking so many people to work for free up front, that I was super like, I'm going to be flexible with everybody. So we had more patience. But even as we're doing things now, and our company has grown, and we're doing more, client work, being able to communicate that has been, more of a challenge, because usually when somebody's paying you money, they want it turned over immediately, and they might not understand that the thing that they consider an editing mistake or something they want taken out immediately has to go through the editor, who's not available till 6, who's going to need time to turn that over and then get it back to me, and then have us check it and then get it back to you. It's usually like the speed of business sometimes is like this, and the speed of podcasting is more like a steady metronome. You have to be patient.
Oh, that's great. All right, let's see here. Ryan said, note, be sure to screw and chop any music you steal. JK, JK. By the way, is there an open room to discuss with other attendees, or is this platform mostly one way? Dick said it's an open chat. So in that chat feature, that's open. The Q&A feature comes directly to us. So, so there's a couple more questions that we had. One was around partnerships. So some podcasts will kind of promote or support other podcasts, whether that's a formal partnership, whether, so someone was wondering, when is it effective to cross-promote like that? When should that be reserved solely for sponsors? What are your takes on that?
I think it really is getting to know your audience and just keeping them in the front of mind. Like, if you were the listener, do you think that introducing this partner is valuable? And just kind of have that litmus test before you agree to have a partner or some kind of sponsor or an advertisement, because I mean, it's real people that are spending time with you. Time is our most limited resource, and they are choosing to spend an hour sometimes with you. And so just really focus on your audience and know what's important to them. And not to say that advertising couldn't work, but just keeping in mind, like, is this something they want to hear about?
Absolutely. I think you have to remember when it comes to like partnerships don't have to be, I think sometimes people confuse partnerships when like say one podcast is working with another podcast or things like that, with, sort of trade for services or even discoverability. Discoverability is the most difficult thing in our industry. It's the hardest metric. It's the hardest thing to get past is how do people find your podcast? Our platform tools are not built to do that. And the services that they upload to are absolutely woefully not built to do that. So the best way for a podcast to be discovered is to be featured on other podcasts. In terms of partnerships, I think sometimes that comes down to we're talking maybe to similar audiences or around similar issues. We make an agreement and maybe we write it down just so it's formal that says, we'll each cut like a 30-second ad or a 15-second ad, and we will run each other's ads on this many of our episodes, right? You make it clean. It doesn't cost anybody anything because you're just going to do it together. And then you're helping to boost the signal for each other. Sometimes that can be, executed as, as a partnership. I'll feature you as an expert on my show. You feature me as an expert, or we tap into each other's network of people and we kind of cross promote each other this way. And you can work that out however you want. A lot of times partnerships in podcasting space is based on trade and trade of services. When you're dealing with partnerships with actual organizations that can put money behind your business, I agree with you 100%. The audience trusts you. You've built trust with them. That means something. You have to have integrity behind that. So if I make products and services for women, I'm very focused on women thinking and feeling better about themselves. If I start pulling advertisers that pray to the lowest common denominator of making women feel crappy about themselves, I suck. And now you don't trust me. So you start seeing Botox ads popping up on Matriarch shows. We have not just sold out, but we have sold our soul. Don't do that. It can be very hard to turn down money. Trust me. It can be very hard to turn down money. But in the long run, you have to decide why you're in this, why you're doing this, what's the real purpose, and how you want your audience to, one, view you at the end of the day, and two, what kind of relationship you want to have with them overall. People can't trust you if you're not, if you don't stand by things that you say you're going to do and you don't stand by your word. Exercise that in every single part of your business, whether it's how you get your music or how you talk to the audience or who you let advertise at your audience or how you sell to your audience, making sure that they know an ad is an ad when they see it. Not, oh, I was having a good talk to you and this was a great conversation, but you know what I really love? I love cotton candy. So let's start that, and then some ad rolls into like a discussion. That is a terrible thing to do to your audience. And all of this kind of stuff comes down to the integrity of what you do. And you have integrity in your everyday, practice it in your business and practice it in your podcast.
So we are coming close to time. John said, hey, thank you folks. Really very, very good information, a huge help. Thank you, John, for joining us. I want to close with two things. Any other words of wisdom that you all would add that maybe we haven't covered? And then anything that you want to plug or share, anything that's happening in your world that you want to kind of share with this community?
I guess what I would add is have fun with it. Just play around. It's such a creative space, and there's so many different formats and ideas that you can communicate. And I think as long as you kind of keep that going, that will keep you going, like I mentioned before. So just have fun with it. As far as plugging things, I did create a page on our website for tips. And so if it's helpful, it's got some links with some of the things that we mentioned. I did not know about the Gimlet one, so that would be another one to add. Oh, very cool. And I mean, there is in the tech community here, just kind of like Habit Aware is having their podcast launch coming up. So that's coming. That's
I love them and I love them so much.
They are so good. So, and Anila has she interviewed some great people and shared her story. And so
I love that.
that's just like a little plug to look forward to.
Great.
That's awesome. I guess my one piece of advice going forward is I want people to go make things. You said it perfectly earlier. It is one of the only industries, media industries, where we can get in here and still compete with like the Oprahs and the NBCs and the and the Universal Studios of the world and still be an even playing field. We might always have the same resources, but if I make something interesting and compelling and the audience connects to it, I can be a little dog in a really big fight and still be here. I think that's amazing that we can do that. I think it's amazing that I can decide tomorrow to go make something, and with very limited set of tools, I can make something as high of a quality as what will come out of a studio or come out of the space at NPR or something else. It's a remarkable gift that as an industry, it hasn't been, the indie spirit and the indie access to the industry hasn't been completely crushed by, big business or, finance. I love that we can do that. So please go make things, because the industry we haven't hit a bubble. We haven't even begun to tap the real beauty of what podcasting can do in the space and what the industry could actually become. That's going to be determined by us and the work that we do moving forward. So go out and start making the work so we can really start defining what this industry is going to be in the future. As far as a plug, I have a network. We make shows for women. Anybody can listen, but we make shows primarily for women. We have 7 shows that are on the air now. We have 3 that are launching. We'll have the website and the link. We also make some shows for corporate clients that we're really proud of, and we love to have folks weigh in and share them. They're Twin Cities based, and we love getting the word out and getting support out for voices in the Twin Cities trying to make things. And the last plug is come to Women in Podcasting. I want you to learn. I want you to learn. I want you to get access to learn. So
yes. We had 2 closing questions come through. One's from John. Name your favorite podcast that you love that's not your own, perhaps the most empowering.
I really like revisionist history. That is one of my favorites. So Malcolm Gladwell, who's an author and just a great thinker. I feel like I reference a lot of like what he says, and there's a podcast all about doing the granny free throw shot.
Oh, really?
And how basketball players refuse to do it, even though it was more accurate and you could get more baskets because it looks stupid. So he just he explores topics and digs in deep, and it's really well produced, and it's one of my favorites.
My absolute favorite podcast, now funny as it is, when I'm listening to podcasts, I tend to listen to things that are more fun. There's a lot of things I take in all the time for work, but when I'm listening just for fun, my favorite is Switched On Pop. It is a podcast made by a musicologist and a writer who takes something that people don't take seriously, pop music, and actually explore it. They explore the history of it. They explore the construction of music. They explore the influences. They explore how it is relevant to pop culture and how it historically has ties back. It is beautifully made. It is so deeply thoughtful and creative. It is fun. It is absolutely my standard bearer for how to take something seriously. How to take something fun, but still treat it with serious context. I love that show. People should listen to it.
Fantastic. The last one's more of a comment from Ryan to the group, and I hope this is okay. I'm trying to get off the ground, and the meetup groups no longer meet, and I found no Twin Cities Facebook groups for podcasting. If there are any men that are interested in a short collab, maybe just to encourage, mastermind, get going. I would love a few enthusiastic friends in the space. Please email me.
Wait, there's a Twin Cities Podcasters on Facebook. Twin Cities Podcasters is on Facebook. They do meet up once a month. Maybe not with as much regularity. The woman who was running it has had some personal struggles. But I know the group is still meeting. So that's a number one resource. If you're coming at this from like the editing perspective and the technical perspective, Twin Cities Radio Club. They're happy to have members. It's free access, but it also gets you in a room with people that make high-level audio and video content here in the radio markets and TV markets, and they love to have people come out, and you can learn so much. Last month, we got to talk to the producers from In the Dark about how they do what they do.
What?
That's the kind of access they give you. So those are 2 really great resources. We ran a conference last year called Podcast to Nord for people wanting to get into podcasting and learn across the board. We're reshaping that, but it's going to be coming back in a format of some sort this summer and probably as a learning platform. Not quite ready yet, but we're getting there. And I'm trying to think, there was at least one other, dang it, there was at least one other organization. If you're just looking even from a local perspective on it, Buzzsprout, the hosting platform, has a Facebook group that is a very like indie community, like we're all in this together, how can we troubleshoot for each other? And you don't have to have a Buzzsprout account to join it. This is usually how you find out about it, but they're a good resource. They're a really great resource too. And grab some newsletters, grab Podcast Movement's newsletter. Go check out like things like Pod News that will actually kind of point you to services, even if they're not locally based services.
And if you have any specific questions, feel free to email or reach out.
Fantastic. All right, well, we're going to close. We will be following up via email with some of the resources that we described. Thank you so much to you both for being here and all your wisdom. I know I learned a lot, so selfishly, I love this. Check us out next month. We're having a mini AMA on how to rock pair programming. We're going to be having Janessa White and Kristen Womack for that. So otherwise, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.